We're going to be in John, the 5th chapter this morning. Have you ever been reading through the Bible and you come across someone and you say, I know someone just like that. I know someone like that. This morning in our reading, as I go through that, I think, I know that guy. I know is exactly who this fellow they're talking about is. And so here we are in John, the 5th chapter, beginning in verse 1. It says, after these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there in Jerusalem by the sheep gate, a pool which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticles. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at a certain season into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring of the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him laying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. Now, it was on the Sabbath day. So the Jews were saying to the man who was cured, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not permissible for you to carry your pallet." But he answered them, "He who made me well was the one who said to me, 'Pick up your pallet and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Pick up your pallet and walk'?" But the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "Behold, you become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. For this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But he answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working." Have you ever seen this guy? I tell you, I know this guy. Now, the overall lesson and what you need to see from the text is that Jesus is able to do what you are hopeless and helpless to do on your own. Get that? Jesus is able to do what you are hopeless and helpless to do on your own. So if you walk away today and say, what was that lesson about? That's what it was about right there. Now, there's a couple of details I need to point out in this text for you. First of all, this Bethesda pool. This Bethesda pool, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. And for centuries, this Bethesda pool was lost. No one knew where this Bethesda pool was. Now, that didn't miss the sight of the critics at all. The critics would say, "Where's this Bethesda pool?" And no, this is just some made-up pool, like a lot of the other stories in the Bible, is just something made up. But after this pool was lost for centuries, wouldn't you know it, that in the late 1960s, archaeologists were digging on the Temple Mound, and what would you think they found there over 50 years ago? They found a pool that had 5 porticles. 5 porticles. And so before you listen to whatever the critics say, know that they usually speak too soon and too much about what's going on. So this Bethesda pool, you might read a commentary. It'll tell you how long it is, how wide it is, how deep it is, give you details of it. The reason they're doing that is because they have seen the archaeological reports about this. And so that's the first thing I want us to point out. The second thing I want you to notice, that verse 4 is not in all of your Bibles. Some of your translations doesn't even have verse 4 in it. If you have a King James Version, it does. And if you have a New American Standard Version, it does. I just read it to you. But in the New American Standard Version, there's a mark in the margin. it says the end of verse 3 and verse 4 aren't in most of the older manuscripts. Huh. So what's that about? Well, have you ever written in the margins of your Bible? I write little notes in the margins of my Bible sometime. And apparently a scribe got hold of a manuscript and had some writing in the margins, and he just added that into the text. Someone was explaining why this guy was talking about the stirring of the waters, and he tells us about this superstitious legend that was going around in that day. The legend said that an angel would come down and stir up the water, and the first person down in the water, well, he would be healed. Now, that's just a legend. It's not part of the original text. Now, we have the restoration of the Greek text. I don't know if you understand that concept, but we have thousands and thousands of Greek manuscripts and parcel pieces of manuscripts. And when you put all those together, you realize that this was something added later on by some scribe. It wasn't part of the original text. So I'm just telling you that this is just a legend, verse 4, that was added to some of those old manuscripts, and so it wouldn't be part of it. But superstition is interesting, because what superstition does is it gives us an element of control over our lives. That's what superstition is, giving ourselves control over certain aspects of our life. When I grew up as a kid, there was a house in our city that was so ornate. It was so huge and it was so ornate. I mean, it was over the top in the way it was so ornate. And it was painted white and it was huge. And on the front, it had a sign that said, Palm Street, fortunes told. And as kids, Mom, we had all kinds of wondering what goes on in that big old house, But they would tell your fortune. And we have palmistry, reading your palms and reading your fortune, doing certain routines that will promise you certain results. There's an interesting text in Deuteronomy, the 22nd chapter. Let me go over here. This is one of those strange texts, and we read it and shake our head a little bit. But Deuteronomy 22nd chapter makes sense in its context. Listen to this. Verse 9. You shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, or all the produce of the seed which you have sown, and the increase of the vineyard will become defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Now, when was the last time you were tempted to do that? You shall not wear a material mixed of wool and linen together. And how many times do you have someone read that and go, oh, look at this. Now, what's this about? This is so ridiculous. Well, let me tell you what this is about. This is about, the context is about a people and living in this land. We're talking about an ancient time that was filled with superstition. And one of the superstition was that if you would mix the seed in your garden just right, if you would put this kind of seed and that kind of seed and just have the values just exactly right, you would have an abundant harvest at the end. And it was total superstition. Another superstition was if you would mix the material in your clothing just right, you would be able to get pregnant and have a child. And it was total superstition. And what superstition does is diminish what God does for us and makes claim for it that we did that. Oh, we caused this great crop to come along. We caused ourselves to be so fertile with children. When really it's God that's given us that blessing, but we give the credit to ourselves because we've done this certain routine. We went through this certain ritual. Through some kind of mystical, magical way, we have caused this thing to happen. Well, they're just trying to explain to us, somebody was trying to explain to us what this legend was about that would cause this man to think if he got into this pool first, that he would be healed. There's some aspects of the Old Testament that are really strange on our first reading. And I want to pull over and talk about some of it, but I don't want my sermon to go too long, but I'm going to address some of this on my Thursday class. For instance, it talks about if you have a rebellious and a drunken child to go out and take take him to the gate, and then you can take him and stone him to death. And we have the critics saying, well, the Bible, the Old Testament, God was so cruel, he demanded that people would go out and take their child and kill him. Well, that's not what it says at all. We need to realize that the Bible needs to be read literarily, not literally. Sometimes we say, well, we take the Bible literally. No, we don't take it literally. I mean, we don't take the Psalms literally when it says the trees clap their hands. We take it literarily. We take the context in which it is written in and try to understand what God was telling those people and how it might have to do with us today. I'll talk about this later. I just want to pull over and say I'm going to talk about this later in one of my classes because it's something I see over and over the critics being saying. But all these critical comments about the Old Testament, when I look at them, I think these are ridiculous. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people that look at these and go, whoa, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so the first thing is we need to understand about this pool. Secondly, we need to understand about verse 4. And third, we need to understand about this fellow, this guy here. It doesn't say that this guy was lame. It doesn't say he was lame. It says that he was ill, that he had been sick for 38 years. Now, that's an awful long time to be sick. Some of you aren't even 38 years old right now. I mean, and no matter what age you are, take whatever age you are and subtract it by 38, and you'll realize, man, that's an awful long time to be sick. It doesn't say that he was lame for 38 years. He had been ill and sick for 38 years. And it also doesn't say he was laying by this pool for 38 years. He was laying by the pool now. He'd been sick for 38 years. Now he was laying there because he was looking for some kind of help. Now, there's a lot of illnesses today, a lot of sicknesses today that can result in you not being able to walk. I mean, there are so many things that will leave you bedfast for long enough that when you start coming around, you're not going to be able to walk. Your legs have forgotten. They've lost their strength. This guy had been sick so long he couldn't walk apparently any longer, but that was not the problem. He was sick with something else. Now, this guy, have you seen this guy? Because I know this guy. He is full of excuses. I hope you see that in the story. This guy has so many excuses. He never takes responsibility for anything. He's never accountable for anything that's going on. He never wants to be accountable. He always has an excuse. Jesus asked him, do you wish to get well? I remember when I was younger, I thought that has got to be the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. If you've been sick for 38 years, of course you wanted to get well. But now as I'm older, I realize that Jesus knew something that I didn't know when I was younger. That folks are not going to get better until they want to. Folks aren't going to change until they want to make that change, till they want to get better. I had a woman some time back, and she called me up and wanted some help because her son was in Portland, living on the streets of Portland, and he was addicted to drugs. And so we reached out to him. The problem with this son, the problem we had is that he didn't want to change. He enjoyed where he was. He was living in that moment and he didn't want to change. And there was not a thing that we could do to help him until he come to the point where he wanted to change. And so Jesus asked this guy this important question. Do you want to get better? Now I want you to notice something. The way this guy answers the question. He doesn't say, yes, Lord, please help me. Sir, get me into this water. What he says is, he gives an excuse. Well, I can't get well. There's nobody here to help me. I'm helpless here. There's no one to help me. He doesn't give an answer. What he gives is an excuse. And Jesus goes ahead and heals him anyway. Now the problem here that comes up in the story is that this was a Sabbath day, and the Jewish leaders are going to be upset because Jesus was healing on a Sabbath day. Now I could give a whole sermon on the problem of following the Sabbath, and we will get into that aspect of these stories a little bit later, but not today, because that's just a rabbit hole I think a lot of preachers get stuck on, and I've done that too. I've gone down this rabbit hole of the Sabbath day and missed the whole point, I think, of what the story's about. So anyway, the Jews, when it says the Jews here, by the way, it means the Jewish leaders, and some of your translations say that, the Jewish leaders. They confront this guy. They confront this man, and they said, why are you carrying your pallet on the Sabbath day? And did you notice what he does? He gives, what? An excuse, of course. Well, what do you mean? The guy who healed me, he told me to do it. Not only gives he an excuse, he blames somebody else for his problem once again. That's just the MO of this guy. In verse 11, he says, he who made me well was the one who said to me, pick up your pallet and walk. It's not my fault. I wouldn't have ever done this, but he said to it, need to do it. And they said, well, who was this guy? And he didn't know who it was. And this is really important here too. Notice this guy doesn't even have faith because he doesn't know who Jesus even is. And he doesn't know him. And then what it says in verse 14, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, behold, you have become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you. Now, this is an interesting concept. Sometimes we have this little cliche, somebody will get sick or somebody get injured or whatever, and this little cliche we use is, well, it could have been worse. Here's a guy who'd been sick for 38 years, and Jesus said, stop sinning because it could get worse. What could be worse than what he's already gone through? Well, it makes us ask the question, is there a connection between sin and sickness? Now, I'll tell you, we're going to develop this idea a little bit more fully when we get to John the 9th chapter. But we have to ask, is all sickness caused by sin? And the answer is, well, no, it's not. And John the 9th chapter will tell us that. If you get sick, it wasn't because you did something wrong. However, is it always that way? Do we ever get sick because of sin? Well, yeah, we can. There's a lot of problems that come because of sin. I mean, there is the guilt and shame that come with it that cause lethargy, depression, anxiety, guilt, a lack of appetite, ulcers, sleeplessness, high blood pressure, kidney failure, liver disease, sexually transmitted diseases, death. I mean, the list, it sounds like the end of a commercial advertising some kind of medication. Here's the side effects. Well, yeah, our sin can cause us to have all kinds of illnesses, all kinds of sicknesses. I was reading of a famous actress. If I told you who it was, you would recognize her. And during her career, she got caught up in addiction. And she said she felt guilty, shame, humiliated, disgust, disappointment, and every other bad word you can think of. That's all that happened to me. She goes, but no one would help me. Do you want to get well? Verse 7, do you want to get well? Do you wish to get well? It's not my fault. Excuses and blame. It seems like ever since we have known good from evil in the Garden of Eden, we have been excusing ourselves and blaming someone else. Adam says, it was the woman you gave me. Eve says, it was the serpent's fault. Every excuse in the church, someone told me once, could be summarized by my husband, he, my wife, she, my children, they, my dog, it. I mean, you can excuse yourself and blame somebody for just about anything. It's not my fault. No one will help me. I didn't do it. No one saw me do it. You can't prove it. I know this guy. This guy who's constantly giving excuses, constantly blaming somebody else. You know, it's one thing to read through a story in the Bible and see someone you know in the story. But it's a totally different thing when you read the story and you find yourself there. And that is what happens to me. There are some things I have struggled with for an awful long time. 38 years is nothing. I'm 60 some none of your business, you know? And I have been dealing with some things for an awful long time. I have been dealing with pride and selfishness and lust and anger and worry. Oh, the list can go pretty long. I mean, how long is your list of all those things that you just keep struggling with over and over? Because change is hard. We become comfortable with where we are. We become comfortable in our misery. We become comfortable and we don't want to change. Everyone wants things to change, but no one wants to change. I mean, we see all this turmoil and this protest. One of the things that, everybody's pointing to, the problems are the government, the problem is greed, the problem is racism, the problem is... What I want to hear just one person say is, I'm the problem. I'm the problem here. It's easy to make excuses. It's easy to blame everybody else. It's really hard to say, I'm the problem here. Now, in the end, it says, the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. I mean, he's still blaming Jesus. He's still blaming somebody. He is the victim in all this. And that's the problem with this man. He sees himself in this life as being the victim of all the stuff that's happening to him. Somewhere along the line, we've got to take responsibility. Yes, I want to get well. Yes, I want to get well. Too often, I'm like this man. I'm just too full of excuses and blame. Somewhere I have to stop and confess I'm just not competent enough to run my own life. I need the power and grace of God to intervene. Because God is able to do, Jesus is able to do what I am hopeless and helpless to do myself. What a miracle. This is one of the most amazing. It doesn't even appear that this man even has faith and he is saved. God's mercy and God's grace in this miracle is God just too nice? Is God just too nice? Here is a gift to be received with thanksgiving. And we have the Jewish leaders on the one side saying, well, we're not even going to look at what's going on because you broke the Sabbath. We have the guy who's healed who says, well, it wasn't my fault. But then you take a look at Jesus. And Jesus responds in verse 17, my Father is working until now, and I myself am working. God just never gives up on us. He just keeps on working. Stop blaming everybody else. Stop making excuses and just confess to God, I need your help. I can't get through another day without you. Every day Jesus is working. Every day God still works. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every single morning. He continues to work with us and he doesn't give up. This tells us a lot about Jesus in this story. He is able to do what we are hopeless and helpless to do ourselves. Our salvation is what he did on the cross, because I was hopeless and helpless to do anything about my sin. He gave us the Holy Spirit to empower us by his grace to change. And so we are changing. We are being transformed into the likeness of Jesus. I read a story I want to share with you. It's called Leaving the City of Regret by Larry Harp. He says, I had not really planned on taking a trip this time of year, and yet I found myself packing rather hurriedly. This trip was going to be unpleasant, and I knew in advance that no real good could come of it. I'm talking about my annual guilt trip. I got tickets to fly there on I Wish I Had Airlines. It was an extremely short flight. I got my baggage, which I could not check. I chose to carry it myself all the way. It was weighed down with 1,000 memories of what might have been. No one greeted me as I entered the terminal to the Regret City International Airport. I say international because people from all over the world come to this dismal town. As I checked into the last resort hotel, I noticed that they would be hosting the year's most important event, the annual pity party. I wasn't going to miss that great social occasion. Many of the town's leading citizens would be there. First, there would be the Dunn family. You know, should have, would have, and could have. Then came the I Had family. You probably know Wish and his clan. Of course, the opportunities would be present, missed and lost. The Vigus family would be the yesterdays. There are far too many of them to count, but each one would have a very sad story to share. Then shattered dreams would surely make an appearance, and it's their fault would regale us with excuses, about how things had failed in his life, and each story would be loudly applauded by "Don't blame me," and I couldn't help it. Well, to make a long story short, I went to this depressing party knowing that there would be no real benefit in doing so. And as usual, I became very depressed. But as I thought about all the stories of failures brought back from the past, it occurred to me that all of this trip and subsequent pity party could be canceled by me. I started to truly realize that I did not have to be there. I didn't have to be depressed. One thing kept going through my mind. I can't change yesterday, but I do have the power to make today a wonderful day. I can be happy, joyous, fulfilled, encouraged, as well as encouraging. Know this, I left the city of regret immediately and left no forwarding address. Am I sorry for mistakes I've made in the past? Yes, but there's no physical way to undo them. So, if you're planning a trip back to the city of regret, please cancel all your reservations now. Instead, take a trip to a place called Starting Again. I liked it so much that I have now taken up permanent residence there. My neighbors, the I Forgive Myselfs and the New Starts, are very helpful. By the way, you don't have to carry around heavy baggage because the load is lifted from your shoulders upon arrival. God bless you in finding this great town. I'm taken by what Jesus said to this guy. Pick up your pallet and walk. Leave your past behind you and start now. And if you're thinking, but I can't do that, then you're humble enough to go to God and say, but God, you are able to do what I'm hopeless and helpless to do my own. God is so good to us. If we just humble ourselves and come to Him, and He is willing to give us mercy and give us His grace. And we can have this joy of the Lord within us every day because there's nothing I can do to change the past. Thank God that He's able to forgive me of all the things I've ever done and say, just pick up your pallet and move forward. And I'll continue to forgive you as you walk in the light as I'm in the light. Isn't God great? Isn't God good? Have a wonderful week. God bless you all.